Now is it on? Oh, yes it is. Hello and thank you all for coming and joining us. I'm so happy to see so many horror fans out there. This is the annual panel entitled The Bold Voice of Contemporary Horror. My name is Yamato. I'm a reporter at the LA Times and thank you. I'll be at karaoke later, testing all the microphones. We have a great panel here for you today. We've got guests, we've got filmmakers, we've got writers, directors, producers, we have clips, and we have some very exciting giveaways, so there's a lot in store. I'd like to, we'll just start off and go down the row and introduce the people we have here for you today. First off, on my left, Ryan Turek, VP of Development at Blumhouse.
Hello.
We have Miss Molly Elfman, who's a producer with so many credits, I'm gonna let her get to them and describe all of them. She's a very busy person. Her credits include Before I Wake, the fun-size horror anthology, Ashram, and many other movies and projects she will be describing to us today. We've got Dave Kajganich. I said it right. Kajganich rides the Titanic, don't forget it. He's the showrunner of AMC's The Terror and the writer of the upcoming Suspiria. 2 days left, we have Mr. Rusty Cundieff, writer-director of Tales from the Hood and Tales from the Hood 2. Anouk Whissell, one of the directors from the RKSS Directing Filmmaking Collective, whose films include The Wonderful Turbo Kid and the upcoming Summer of '84. Now, what we have assembled here is a real, I feel very privileged to have a conversation with you guys about horror because you represent so many different branches of what genre storytelling can be. So I'd like to just start broadly in hearing down the line, maybe starting with Anouk on the end. What is your relationship to horror? How do you think of it? What does horror even mean to you?
I started being interested in horror when I was I was super young. Our parents are cinephile. So they introduced us when we were very kid, like my brother and I, to horror. I think my first memory of watching a movie with my parents was Invaders from Mars. So
Toby Hooper or the original?
Yeah. Toby Hooper. And later on, I had a big brother, so he just kept showing me these horror films I was way too young for, and I kind of blame him for not being scared in movies easily anymore. Horror is a very I feel it's very powerful because it makes you feel something, and you can just let yourself go. It's safe, but you can get scared and get in so many really crazy adventure.
And Rusty, what was your entree into horror?
Let's see. I guess in some ways similar. As a kid, you're fascinated by all the things you're not supposed to watch or see. And we had Chiller Theater. That was our scary local dude playing stuff Saturday night at 11 o'clock or 11:30. And so I would stay up and watch that, and I would get scared, and then I would go in my parents' bedroom and sleep on the floor next to them because I was too afraid to be alone. And my dad took me to The Exorcist early. I don't know why. It was a strange thing, but we went and saw that, and I can remember being really happy I had bunk beds because I figured the devil couldn't lift those. But yeah, it started when I was young, and you just get fascinated by all these different little elements. And then we would go to the Saturday matinees. They still had the Saturday matinees where your parents would drop kids off and you would stay in there for like 5 or 6 hours and watch movie after movie. So you'd see like, you know, Oblong Box and a bunch of Vincent Price stuff and, you know, just weird things from Britain and, you know, eat popcorn and try and meet girls. That's what you do.
Not a bad play.
Not bad.
Dave.
I grew up in a really rural area during the sort of the advent of like cable TV. And so I think horror kind of saved my life. You know, I was growing up gay in a really rural place and feeling big things and feeling like big things coming at me and wondering like who do I see on TV or in the movies I can identify with. And you see enough final girls in horror movies, I think I know how she feels. It's wrong.
Molly.
It's not wrong. You know, I was recently reminded of this story, because I don't know why I got into horror, but I'm a very curious person by nature. But I was reminded of this story when I was a kid. My family collects shrunken heads, skeletons, lots of taxidermy, all that type of stuff. And above one of the doorways was this tiny little skeleton that wasn't real or anything like that. It had been carved out of wood. And I remember my dad telling me that none of the other skeletons would let him play with him because he wasn't scary enough. So whenever I would pass by him, I had to scream as loudly as I could. So I did, and then he told me that the little skeleton was allowed to play with the other skeletons. That made me feel good. So instead of being raised in an environment where I was scared of skeletons or scared of ghosts, I wanted to make sure that they were okay and I wanted to understand them. And I think that that's all that I do is want to know where the ghosts are, and I'm curious about why they're there.
You grew up in an awesome house full of spooky things, though.
It was also a haunted house, like notoriously a haunted house. So there's a lot of issues. By the way, the whole like upbringing parents thing is very that's
Central.
Yeah, central to getting into horror.
And Ryan.
Yeah, my parents were very supportive and continue to be supportive of my dark tastes. But I think it was Stephen King's Cycle of the Werewolf, and I think it was released in 1986. My dad was a big book collector, and he didn't really censor anything in our house, and he left it on one of the, you know, back in '86 we had these giant speakers for some reason, and he left the book on top of the speaker, and it said illustrated by Bernie Wrightson, and I was just like, oh, cool, this one's illustrated. And I started looking at it, and it was these images, these completely grotesque images of like a woman getting her face torn off by a werewolf, or a werewolf sitting on top of the cab of a car eating a cop, and I was like, I'm really interested in these visuals. I don't know why, but I love it. And I was a big comic book kid too, and then I started, and because of the comic books, I was hanging out at a comic book store, and I wasn't working for free, but working for free meant just comics, and this satisfied me. And Fangoria issue number 90 landed in my hands, and it was the Night of the Living Dead remake. And Fangoria was one of those things I could not have at all, just because my dad was pretty into the genre. And then I just started reading about the industry, and I started reading about the people who were behind it, and that just kind of kicked my interest in the horror industry even more, and elevated it. And I brought it home and I threw the Fangoria on the kitchen table, and I was just like, I bought this. And my parents were like, oh, great, okay, cool. Okay, yes, you're old enough to have this. But since then, horror to me has always just been, in terms of just kind of personal life, I just liked initially like being in middle school and seeing the reaction that my fellow classmates had when I was reading Tommyknockers or Misery or any other Stephen King book. It was one of usual revulsion and curiosity, and it just kind of, I just liked embracing that kind of misfit nature, and it was always, horror was a companion to me more than anything, and it continues to be, and I loved it so much that I wanted to just make it part of my life and work within that industry. And I don't mind being pigeonholed at all. I don't want to do a comedy. I don't want to produce dramas. I don't want to produce action movies. I want to make horror films for the rest of my life.
Well, the beautiful thing is, within horror, you can make all of those other genres.
You can, yes, indeed. Yeah. Horror comedy is probably my favorite subgenre.
Well, as now storytellers, you are out of those formative childhood years. As storytellers making movies and telling stories in 2018, where do you see yourself creatively in relation to genre? Whether that is, our sense for nostalgia, which is very strong in this world, versus innovation, versus experimenting outside of the sort of traditional lines of what genre has meant in the past. This is questions for anybody, and everybody. But how do you approach creating right now?
All right, I'm going.
Molly, take it, Molly.
No, I think right now is actually an incredibly exciting time because being outside of the box and being in the margins is you're asked to have your voices heard. I think we've heard numerous stories told by certain perspectives, and now it's being supported to actually have an innovative voice. And what I found for me is that I can't really get behind a film and do everything that I know it's going to take at this point after years of it, unless it's something that personally resonates with me. And then the stories that personally resonate all of a sudden actually have a home, because I was taking these projects out for years and nobody even wanted to discuss them, and now I get to tackle, for me, female protagonist doesn't even cover it. I mean, let's talk about what it's like to be a pinup on the walls and then taken off, and then what that does to your psyche. And that is a horror film for sure. And then, the idea of childbirth, the idea of all these different things, which I find so exciting because we get to actually discuss them. And we get to have fun at the same time, which I think is a really important balance of how to tackle really difficult issues, but make them, something that you actually want to have fun and watch.
I think it's interesting because when people come into my office and they're like, "What are you guys looking for at Blumhouse?" And it's such a hard question to answer because I think
I've asked him that so many times.
You have.
We want Get Out too.
No, it's just. I agree. No, I think it's just interesting because I used to be a journalist. I ran a horror website for a very long time. I worked for Fangoria, and our job is to map the history of horror and where things have come and gone and where it's going. And I think the last big phase was the ill-titled torture porn phase. We were seeing Saw, Hostel, Turistas, Hills Have Eyes remake, all these things. We are living a very exciting era now for horror movies because we're getting so much diversity. We are getting Get Outs, we are getting The Summer of '84, we are getting Quiet Place, even on the small screen, The Terror, which I absolutely love, so congratulations. And there's no box to be put in anymore. There's no fad. It's just a lot of great creatives telling the stories they want to, smuggling the themes that they want to, depending on where they wind up producing their films and getting the creative freedom they want. It's just kind of a free-for-all, and that's awesome. I think that the last time the genre had a free-for-all was the early 90s, because everybody in the studio was trying to figure out what the hell is going, we were just coming out of the slasher era, and we were getting films like In the Mouth of Madness, and Candyman, and Jacob's Ladder, and Bram Stoker's Dracula, and even though people look upon that early decade and go, there wasn't anything great. Fuck you, there was a lot of great stuff coming out. We're back in that now, and I think there's a lot of just great, exciting stuff, and for us, that's what we're trying to, at Blumhouse, that's what we're trying to get. It's just a lot of diversity and just tell really fresh stories that hopefully mean something.
So that'll help your Blumhouse pitches. Something exciting, guys. Actually, Dave, maybe you can take it from there, because you represent on this panel as well somebody who's told genre stories on television very well. What do you feel like it's like now to, do you feel like there are more options and different kinds of approaches that you can take?
Sure. Yeah, I think what's happening now as horror is sort of leaking over into television is you're confronted with the demands of a long-form narrative. And I think, I felt for a while that horror movies in the last 20 years have trained audiences to confuse being startled with being scared. And you kind of can't do that over and over and over again on television. It just won't work. And you also can't look to innovative blocking for scares. You run out of that pretty quickly as well. As much as I have loved The Walking Dead, that's something that you can see a mile away in that show. You know, the corner that they don't cover with a camera angle, you know a zombie's gonna walk out of that corner. And, you know, they've tried really hard to make that fresh 5,000 times, but, you know, long form demands that you care about something more than being startled. And so I think it's a great litmus test for how good is your project, by which I mean how good are your characters. Because if you can actually get an audience to invest in characters in a horror narrative for 10 hours, for 30 hours, for 50 hours, depending on how many episodes you're doing, you've really won, because then you really are trafficking in anxiety as opposed to startling. And that's, to me, that's the great gift, opportunity that television's offering horror, that test.
Well, and Rusty, you have the unique experience of returning to a franchise that you pulled off, in my opinion, very well, classically well, in 1995's Tales from the Hood.
Appreciate it.
And, you know, 20-something years later, returning to that, to a very different industry, very different audience. So how has that affected your and your partner Darren's approach to Tales?
Well, just let me say, Darren is here, so Darren, stand up.
Darren.
It's interesting. I mean, the psycho thing for us is that everything we did in Tales 1 is still relevant, which is really too bad. We hope that we kind of gone past it all. But, you know, we still look at how we go about telling our stories in a lot of the same ways, because we're just kind of picking what's happening in the world, and we're having to be reflected in the stories. And it's interesting, you know, hearing everyone's kind of take on it, and I agree, especially when you're doing an anthology, which is, you know, what we do. We have all these different types of stories within the anthology, and in Tales 2, which we just had up at the Fantasia Fest, it was really interesting because we have tales that are absolutely funny. Darren has a tale that's like incredibly funny in this one, and then I have a tale where some people actually kind of tear up and cry. And I don't know how many people have ever teared up or cried in a horror film before, but and it's still entertaining. And you know, people here they're crying, oh, that's going to be sad. Well, yeah, but it's still entertaining. There's still tension into your comment, what you were saying, in terms of making characters that you care about and deal with issues that are important. You know, one of the things that I think that a lot of people are bringing to horror now, and which you can bring, is whatever your interests are, even outside of the genre, you can implement within the genre, which is really cool. And so that's what we, you know, obviously what we try and do with Tales when we get to our whole social commentary thing. And I do think, I'm always one that believes that art, which, you know, horror is and filmmaking is, it can be used to change minds and change attitudes. In Tales from the Hood 1, we had I had young guys come up to me that were gangbangers that stopped because of the crazy K segment. That is like, you know, better than applause, practically. Yeah. I've had women come up to me that have run shelters for abused women and children and say how cathartic, you know, the David Allen Greer segment was, where he gets all kind of ripped up. So, you know, I think there's just so much room in horror to do really amazing stories that go beyond the scare. The scare is there, the terror is there, the tension is there, but you could just take it to another level.
Well, Anouk, I'd love you to pick up off of that, because Summer of '84, which we are actually going to get a really great exclusive preview of at the end of this panel. It's, of course, set in 1984. It is such a vivid throwback to the kinds of movies that I think a lot of people in this room remember loving. But there's something that is very fresh and new to it, and part of it is you have young teenage heroes, and you care, as Rusty's saying. There's a lot of emotion in there. How did you guys approach creating those characters, and like, what was the fun of playing in that world?
Yeah, it was the first time we actually worked with kids, and that was super interesting. The script was really great because the kids' voice were really like real teen. So they swear, they drink, they're horny. So it was very, yeah, it really depicts the real teens. So yeah, it was very fun to work with them as well, and just also I think one challenge was that they are kids from like they're millennials, like basically, and we wanted them to act like kids from the 80s. So that was something special, but it's really important to take care of your character. That's something that we truly value as well, because you can put them in any situation afterwards. If you don't connect to them, if you didn't make people connect to them, then it doesn't worth anything.
Well, I think there's a good opportunity to cut to our first clip, which is a very special treat from some friends of the panel who couldn't join us here today. The production company SpectraVision and Elijah Wood have a very special introduction for us, a preview, a clip from the movie Mandy. A lighthearted romp from Panelists. Well, I think that's actually a great segue into a conversation about, what is the industry like right now for a genre storyteller? We have recent art horror hits like It Follows, The Babadook, Hereditary earlier this year, if anybody here saw that. On the other hand, studio horror is also quite strong. We've got huge franchises like Insidious, The Purge. The major motion picture Unfriended 2 is about to come out.
It's
Ryan,
out.
Oh God, it's out. Ryan can tell us a little bit about that. But that's one of the most terrifying horror movies I've seen, like almost ever. It's a little too real. Like it had me extremely paranoid and wanting to unplug all my devices. But we have these converging sort of trends, right? Art house versus very commercial properties. How do you feel like that has either widened or narrowed the ways in which you make your projects now? And the conversations you have with financiers or talent about what kinds of projects people want to see now?
Well, I think what's interesting is that right now we're living in a time in which there are homes for horror that represent all types of things we're talking about. A24 is obviously a place for places like, things like Hereditary, that kind of teeter on the edge of art house and mainstream. Hereditary is a very unusual, very good film. The Witch, the same thing. There's SpectraVision, there's, Ghost House is making a return, Dark Castle is making a return. And then you've got all the major studios that are doing more mainstream horror. So if you have a vision and you have a horror story, just kind of identify the place that you think would be the best home for it, And that's what's awesome is right now there's this kind of wide canvas of companies that can do stuff. I can make great horror movies depending on what it is. For us, we kind of, our whole thing is we try to really make theatrical horror films. Sometimes we're 75% there, and sometimes they wind up in a smaller release. We did a film called Upgrade by Leah Whannell. Glad you like that. And Unfriended Dark Web, which opened up on Friday. That's playing on 1,500 screens right now. But our challenge is how do you tell a scary story and get it in theaters when, from January to December, it seems like it's summer movie season. When I was growing up, I looked forward from June to August because that was my time to go see Gremlins 2 and Dick Tracy and The Rocketeer and Batman Returns and all these big tentpole movies. And now Marvel and Fox and all of these and Disney are all putting out these films from January. Black Panther came out in February, and you had Thor Ragnarok in November, and and then Venom comes out at the beginning of October, and it's like, oh my God, there's so much competition. So our challenge is what horror stories do we tell that want to get you off your couch, away from Netflix, away from Amazon, and into a theater for a communal horror movie experience. And that's always our challenge, is try to find those films that can play theatrically and scare the pants off you.
Well, Molly, talk about a little about some of your very various projects. Oh my God, 15 more minutes.
No, that's what I was like,
I know,
ooh.
nobody wants to hear.
Like 15 more hours. Well, yeah, are you finding that doors are opening for genre projects, or are there conditions to that?
I think it's always yes and no. And I think it's always about the partners and the people that you're working with and finding the right partners. One of the companies that I co-founded is called Fun Size Horror. Yeah, thanks guys. We got a couple of filmmakers, I think, too, in the audience, which is great. But what that allowed us to do, I think I've worked with over 95 filmmakers. The last feature that I just made, I made with a Fun Size filmmaker. The next feature that I'm going to make is with a Fun Size. This is where I am developing the future of horror filmmakers for myself.
And a lot of the filmmakers you work with are women.
And
why is that? Why is that?
Honestly, it has nothing to do with the fact that they're women. It has to do with the fact that they're amazing filmmakers who are making stories that I align with and I think are important. And it has, I as much as the future is female, and I have my pin to stick up for that, the point is not just to hire women. The point is that women have amazing stories that haven't been told, perspectives that haven't been told, and I'm a little bit sick of also being brought on to films that were written by men with a female perspective, and they want me to, I call it woman washing, their films. It's just, if you want to know what we think, you don't have to guess. We'll just tell you. And by the way, there's a lot, we just released Dark, Deadly, and Dreadful, which is another series, which is a whole wide range of perspectives. There's female directors, a lot of diversity, there's LGBTQ, and there's more letters in there now, aren't there? Yeah, I'll get there eventually. But I think the point is that for me, I'm not on the same scale. Hopefully I get to work with Blumhouse one day. I get to work with SpectraVision from time to time. I am very much starting the talent that hopefully gets to move on to Blumhouse at a certain point. That is not where I am, and that's not where I want to be. What I'm always trying to do is to find the voice that you have not heard yet, and the perspective that you haven't thought about. And that is very hard, and it's very exhausting, and it's oftentimes not rewarding, but when it hits, it is the most important thing that I think that we can be doing right now.
Well, I'm going to jump around. Thank you. Just because we have very limited time, I'm going to fast forward the hours-long conversation we could be having right now, and ask Dave a little bit about your experience with Suspiria, writing Suspiria. How do you, is it, when you're like, yes, I will write a remake of Suspiria, that sounds easy, everybody will be totally fine with it.
You can't let that in the door. I would have just tripped right over that fear over and over again. And I knew that Luca, the director, had no interest in sort of aping the original, and that's part of the risk. We really have taken it in a completely different direction, not just visually, but the story is completely different. The bare bones are there, but we've just reversed a lot of polarities and all of that. But it made me think of what you were saying earlier. I just had the experience last year of writing and producing a narrative that was 99% men, white guys on two boats in the 1840s. And on weekends, I would get on a plane and go to the Suspiria set where I was writing and producing a narrative that was 95% women. Well, more than that. Is there a man in that film? There's one.
You tell us.
And spent a lot of time on those flights thinking, I should be getting all kinds of insights about what the differences are. And I think the insight I mainly figured out was it was my job to sort of worry the most about making sure those characters felt real, and so I spent a lot of time researching both, but not, I did some research into what was the Victorian idea of masculinity, and what was the 1970s idea of femininity, and I did a little bit of that, but more it was about nailing what a choreographer sounds like when she's talking to her troupe, what an older dancer is talking about with a younger dancer about how she sees her body as a tool and the limits of that. And I figured out if I just answered all of those million research questions well by talking to people who knew the answers, I didn't have to worry anymore about gender, in a sense. I had to worry about making sure that those specific moments were honestly rendered and attached to something. And so I had a great sense of relief finishing Suspiria and handing it off to Luca, knowing that I think we did work in that regard in this remake that I don't know was done in the original, in terms of just trying to figure out what a woman's experience inside of those anxieties would be, instead of just looking at women being taken apart on the screen.
Well, I think this is a great opportunity to roll the trailer. For anybody out here who hasn't seen it yet, Dave, what would you like people, when you set up the new Suspiria, how do you describe this story?
I would describe it as being dragged into a Fassbinder film by a maniac, and then, well, listen.
I'm in. Let's do it.
Let's roll it. It's like Center Stage 2. Rusty, there's something that, a conversation that I would love you to lead. I think everybody on the panel will probably have something interesting to say about it, so chime in. But, one thing that Tales from the Hood does, especially for its time, is, as you mentioned before, like really push a social consciousness, a social awareness to the fore through genre. Is this something that, in your experience after the first movie came out, that you found Hollywood or producers or financiers were like, yes, let's have more of those, super easy?
Hell no. No, I mean, people are afraid of politics and social issues, especially in entertainment, because they want to appeal to the broadest audience possible. When we came out with Tales 1 and we talked to marketing, Darren and I begged them to allow the trailers and the materials to show that there were stories that were about things. They cobbled together this mishmash of shots. You couldn't tell what the hell was going on in this damn movie. And it really hurt it. I mean, I think it hurt us at the box office. And I met people afterwards that said, if I knew it was about something, I would have been there. I said, it was good though, but I didn't know. And the truth is, there's a huge audience for that, for socially oriented stories that can work within the genre. Now, some people hate it. Darren and I get our hate from various people that there's like, just do genre. Start hitting me over the head with this story or that, this message or that. But they're entertaining. And I think as long as you entertain, you can tell whatever story you want. And then also for the people that show up after you've read what the movie is about. Because we don't hide the fact that we're talking about racial issues, or we're talking about political issues, or we're talking about sexual issues. This one has a Me Too, kind of a Me Too moment in it, so to speak. We don't hide any of that. So if you show up, it's on you.
It drives me nuts. It drives me nuts when I see comment, and especially I saw some of the Tales from the Hood comments on Twitter. I hate it. I hate when I see people going, keep your politics out of horror. I'm like, dude, you realize that politics and horror go hand in hand. White Zombie, The Damned, Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead. Most of Romero shit, it's like, you know what? Don't be afraid of politics and horror. I think these people are more afraid of the conversation they have to have afterward. I think they're afraid of engaging, and you know what? That's art, and you have to engage.
I think you're right. A lot of people are afraid of engaging. A lot of people are afraid of uncomfortable conversations, which you saw we had one after
my God, yeah.
our screening up at Fantasia.
Yep.
We had some in the first Tales from the Hood thing, but I think, you have to have a conversation, open dialogue, to be able to come to any kind of understanding from one side to the other. And you know, I think that's one of the really things that I like about horror now. Some of the movies that you just referenced, Jen, is that it's interesting. You know, I'm kind of a child, I guess, of the 70s. So I like all these weird, crazy art films too. Well, they'd be called art films now. Back then they were big films. You know, these you know, Urban Cowboy and these things that were big films. And now, because, you know, the kind of Marvel comic world has taken over everything, which is fun, the real stuff kind of happens in horror world. The heroes in horror are more grounded than you find in most of the big mainstream movies, because most of the mainstream movies now have gone to big, giant, you know, guys in suits, which is cool.
They're everywhere here. Have you seen them?
Really? I haven't noticed.
I think it's also part of the responsibility of genre filmmakers to find the boundaries. And if some people aren't pissed off at you, you probably haven't gone far enough.
I mean, anxiety, horror has always been the genre. I mean, all genres in a way have to traffic in anxiety. Romances do, westerns, they all do. Horror was the one that we all gave cultural permission to turn the volume up on anxiety to 11. And if you're just creating fake anxiety, you know what I mean, with jump scares and blocking and loud music, and you really miss the point of the genre from the get-go.
Yeah, and what we obviously try and play with Tales is what I tell my kids, you know, or have when they were younger. It's not the people in the cemetery that are going to mess you up. It's the real people that are going to mess you up. It's the people that are walking around. And horror comes from us every day. We're talking about something that just happened up in Silver Lake in Los Angeles. I mean, horror, we create the horror.
Humans are the real.
We're the drama.
It's sadly true. I would like to, because we're so short on time, we have to get some special guests up here. We have the second and thirds of RKSS here with us. They flew all the way to Canada. Because we have some special clips. We've got Cara Whissell and Francois Simard joining us up here. Three directors of RKSS. So guys, set us up a little bit of, like, Turbo Kid was your first movie.
Yes.
Great movie, love it so much, so much. How did you decide to sort of lean into the 80s serial killer subgenre for your next movie?
I think we just... I'm sorry. I think we just touched it. Well, you guys just touch on it. Real people are scarier than ghosts, and we want to touch on it. Also, it was in the 80s, and you know, Reagan was in power, and the suburbs were starting to be less and less safe. Like, people starting to be paranoid to one another, and it's something that we wanted to explore. And it just fit it perfectly. But you wanted me to set up the clip, right? And I'm starting to
Well, that was a great answer.
In the clip,
No, let's play the trailer first.
Oh, okay.
Guys, the only member of RKSS we haven't heard from is Frank. Frank, why don't you set up the clip that we have for the Comic-Con audience?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll try to have the right microphone. But yeah, you saw Davey. He has a lot of imagination. He suspects his cop neighbor to be a serial killer. Is he right or not? This movie, like, we want to recreate our childhood as an 80s kid, and that's why this story was really passionate to us. But most of all, it takes a huge risk. I won't say what it is, you'll have to find out. But for the clip, it's one of their, I'll let Johan speak because I sense my English is falling apart.
We haven't slept in the last 3 days, so. Yeah, in the clip, the 4 boys that are on this adventure hunting a serial killer. It shouldn't be an adventure. But they think their neighbor has been killed, so they sneak into their house.
And let's roll it. I feel like we gotta run out of here right now, but we do have one very special giveaway. Ryan Turek is going to do the honors as fast as possible.
Okay, really quick, you guys saw the Halloween Comic-Con poster? Well, we got a couple 24 by 36 posters to give away. One that's signed by Jamie Lee Curtis, David Gordon Green, and Jason Blum. So who can tell me? I want to see hands.
Trivia contest!
Middle name of Michael Myers is, yes sir. Audrey's correct, you get a poster.
That was so
You get the signed poster, that was fine.
And then we have a couple more posters to give away, and we have some temporary tattoos from the movie Mandy, which find me outside in the hallway after this. We have to clear the room. You want a little temporary, you want Nick Cage's face on your skin, right? So who doesn't? Thank you so much for coming. Look for these movies coming to you very, very soon.
In theater, the 10th of August for Summer of Reading for Support Indie Films.
Woo!